Okay, today we have two titans of the sort of Les Paul world. We have the Gibson Custom Shop R9, that's the 59 reissue, and we have a very lucky chance to look at a very boutique guitar. This is Nick Huber's Orca 59. So this is the Orca, which is his Les Paul type guitar, and it's his 59 sort of vintage style guitar. So I've got this for a couple of weeks thanks to a viewer called Martin, so thank you very much, that's very kind of you, amongst some other gear which is going to come up in the next week or two. Now this is going to be a three-part video. In this first one I'm comparing the two guitars as played through a Bartel Roseland amp. We'll do three different settings. In the next video I'm going to use my matchless HC30 and my Rift Ainsley Lister. And in the last video we'll put it through one of the Two Rock amps and use two or three pedals and see how it plays in all those different situations. Now I'm not going to give you my final conclusions today, but I'll just tell you a little bit about the guitars. So the Huber is mahogany back and neck, and the top is a curly maple. It's got a Brazilian rosewood fretboard, which is a first for me to play. Other than that, it's a take on the 59, and stylistically it's not exactly, it doesn't look exactly like a Les Paul. It's similar. I have to say personally I'm not a huge fan of the shaping of it. It's a little bit flatter on the top and a bit more exaggerated in the curves. Now it's not an ugly guitar by any stretch of the imagination, but as you put the two together I'm so focused on what I know as a 59 Les Paul, as the Les Paul shape. So I'm a bit of a purist when it comes to that. But I tell you what, once you sit down and play with it, those curves become interesting and more comfortable to play, I would say. Actually, if you're going to sit and play for a long time, the slightly exaggerated curves and size actually sit really beautifully in the body. So I think the styling is there partly just as a difference to the original, but also for ergonomic reasons, which makes it pretty useful. I can't say that I lost after that shape though, so take that as you will. Now, when I first plugged in the guitars, I had a little bit of a play around. They're surprisingly different from each other. Now that's a good thing in my books, because you know, the more variety you can get out of your different gear, the better. Now, I'm not going to tell you what I think right now. Let's just start first of all with a very basic sound through the Bartel. This is the Tweed sound that you can get out one of the Tweed sounds. This is very just quite a basic sound, but that's what I wanted to start this off with. Let's just get a pretty clean chord-based couple of minutes of playing, just to get that first idea of the difference in sound. So what did I take from that? Well, actually, they're pretty similar in that sort of a setting. It doesn't accentuate, the Tweed sound is a pretty flat sound. But here's what I found. In the neck pickup, the Orca had a bit more of a shimmer. So the upper mids and the sort of high end, while still not, it's still a flat sound, there was a sort of shimmering note to them, which was really, really attractive. In the middle pickup, it was the same. In the bridge pickup, the R9 had a more accentuated top end, whilst the Orca still managed to roll that off. So I think that's where one of the first differences I've noted between the two guitars is that the R9 has a more vintage sound. It's got more spark at that top end, which may or may not be what you want, whereas the Orca rolled that off. And although it's a fine difference, the Orca is slightly less muddy sounding. Now, my particular R9 does have a little bit of muddiness to it. I often manage to get rid of that by setting an amp a certain way or using a pedal a certain way. But in this very clean setting, you can clearly hear that the lower mids and the mids much more muddled together, whereas the Orca's more sort of got more clarity. At this point, I wouldn't be able to tell you which one I prefer because A, I don't tend to play in that type of music, this type of sound very often. B, they just were very similar. They would both do the job. Nothing, stood out too much. But it's a good start for the Orca because some people want that more clarity, and I imagine for session work and professional work like that, commercial work, that all helps. When it comes to an artistic sound as to how you want to portray your sound, that's a completely different thing because we all have our own views on that. But we'll talk more about that later. Right, what we're going to do now is move into my sort of setting on an amp, which is this very reverby black panel Fender type sound with a lot more scoop to it and more sort of dynamic response with the fingers. So let's see what that sounds like. this would be interesting to show you. This is the R9 on the left there, and the Huber there. Now you can see the amp is the same. Both guitars I set the pickups volume to be the same and changed it throughout. But the R9 has a much wider spread there, and this one has, you know, a lot more density in the middle. From my point of view, does that mean the R9 has more sort of dynamics to it? It's something more percussive about it, and this is, you know, take from it what you will. And I wonder if the Orca's pickups have got a lower output as well, because they do sound very slightly quieter. And in fact, you know, I'd have to push this up a little bit in the editing suite if I wanted it to sound the same volume as the R9. So I thought that was quite an interesting difference. Now, this is my own type of style of playing that I really enjoy, and I enjoyed this on both guitars. Now I'm very used to the R9 and playing in this way on the R9, so it fits me like a glove. It's actually where I've sort of developed my own playing style, I guess. Whether you like it or not, that's what comes out when I just play as me. And I like the character of the R9 with this. It has its faults on a sort of technical level, in the sense, again, it can be a little bit muddy, but there's something about the way the harmonics work and the notes work together that makes it the way it sounds the way I want to sound. The Orca, again, had more clarity. It sounded more transparent. You know, I felt like when I was playing it that almost it was like playing, I want to say, you know, like a classical guitar with a pickup on it, in the sense that you felt like the sound of the wood. I know it sounds silly, but I think, you know, if you're into looking at guitars like this, you'll know what I mean. You felt like the sound of the guitar was coming out, less rather than a character, a vintage character that the R9 has. So the Orca has its own thing. Now I've got to say the R9 plays more like the actual vintage Gibsons that I've played, and the Orca seems to be like an idealized take, or it's obviously could be based on vintage instruments that I've not played. But there's more clarity, there's more sustain, and in the end, that will be perfect for so many people and exactly what you're looking for. For me, I like the more imperfect character that the R9 has, but it's my first day with this guitar. We're gonna play this through different amps and see how that goes. So to finish off this video today, and I didn't want to make this too long, I've set the Bartel in a Plexi, so it's like a vintage Plexi sort of sound. Think, I guess, JTM 45 type sound. Let's hear how these are in a much more rocky sort of way. Well, you can definitely tell that the R9 has a lot more treble going on there. The top end is much less rolled off, much spikier. Who knows, maybe that could cut through a mix a bit better. The Orca to me had more of that wall of sound sort of feeling, you know, probably a smoother curve to it in pretty much every pickup position, which sounds great. I don't know how that would come through in a mix as well, because the R9 is able to sort of push its way through. But again, when we hear it with the matchless and the Rift Ainsley Lister, we'll talk about that a bit more. So although I should have mentioned this at the beginning, in terms of price, the Orca, I think they go for around $7,000. Maybe there's a difference depending on the exact model and specs that that guitar has. The R99 is in the sort of $5,000 region, but they go up to $10,000 now if they're Murphy heavy aged. But I'd say between $5,000 and $10,000 for the R9, around $7,000-8,000 for the Orca. So very comparable price points to each other. My first impression from this first playthrough is that if you're a Gibson fanboy like me, then nothing will do apart from a Gibson. If you're after something a little bit different though, and I would say in this sense, this is a really professional feeling sounding instrument to me. It would fit with a lot of styles of music, whereas if I was a session guitarist and I was being called to play on lots of different styles for, you know, TV music and all sorts of stuff like that, the R9 has a very distinct character that might make it less appealing and useful for that. So that could be a way to differentiate the two guitars. Safe to say, I think the Huber is beautifully made and a real sort of artisan instrument. As it stands from this video, the R9 is more my style, but you know, I'm just very lucky to play both of these instruments. Okay, I'll see you in the next one with the matchless and the Rift Ainsley Lister. I'm most excited about that. Those two amps are some of the most dynamic and will work really well with the guitar's volumes, and we'll play around with that a lot more. Before I go, if you haven't seen on my channel, I'm doing a giveaway. I'm giving away this Kingtone Dualist pedal. It's the previous model to the current one. It doesn't have the new switches on the outside, but it's a fantastic pedal. I'll send it anywhere in the world. When I hit 6,000 subs, I'll do the giveaway. You have to subscribe and comment. I'll put your name in a hat like I've done with several giveaways before. So yeah, go ahead and do that, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.